The Tanzanian President, John Magufuli, has directed the Controller and Auditor General to conduct an in-depth audit of the mining sector to plug loopholes that, in his case, he rather argues, are essentially being used to cause massive tax losses, especially from the country's mining sector. He issued those directives when receiving the Controller and Auditor General's report for the fiscal year that ended in June. Now, the President also directed the Prime Minister to convene a joint meeting that will bring together all ministers, permanent secretaries of all ministries, the Bank of Tanzania Governor and the heads of public institutions. That report touches on critical areas like central government, tax holidays, revenue collection across the board, and the preparation and implementation of the national budget, national debt, operations of public institutions, including, of course, the utility firm, the Tanzania Electric Supply Company, TANESCO. Now, let's get more details on what exactly is going on in Dar es Salaam. Dan Ashby joins us now live with more data on that story. Dan, the President's directive, it clearly focuses on closing tax loopholes, but which one specifically is he referring to?
Rama, mining companies here get the same tax exemptions that all major investors do, so they can recover much of the tax they get from their capital expenditure. But I think the President will be focusing on so-called mining development agreements. That's where mining companies invest more than $100 million and can get special concessions from the government. Now, I have to say that all the mining companies I've spoke to have emphasized that they are fully tax compliant.
Indeed, but the fact of the matter is these tax breaks effectively were created by the law, so the proper avenue of dealing with them would be to essentially tell legislators, if they actually feel to, they should repeal them. Why isn't this essentially happening, and what good will this sector-wide audit that has been ordered achieve?
There's mixed views on that. I spoke to one mining analyst who said that this is standard procedure, that governments all over the world are reviewing their expenditure. But I think there is also some concern here because of President Magufuli's rhetoric. He has released a statement saying that gold is leaving the country while the people don't have water and the people don't have electricity. And I think the concern is that the combination of that rhetoric with the threat of this statutory instrument, with the audit, is effectively scaring companies into coming to the negotiating table and ending up paying more tax.
Indeed, there's been a ban on exporting mineral ores as well for a long time now. How have companies adapted to that ban, and specifically have all export-oriented operations stopped?
Yes, from what I've heard, all the exports have stopped. Of course, Acacia is the biggest company affected. They have the big gold mines here in Tanzania. They told me today they are still producing and mining that gold, but they're not exporting it. Of course, their shares fell dramatically overnight when the ban was announced, and their revenues will be affected. They can't keep mining continuously unless there is some agreement on these exports. But it's not only that, it's the small companies as well. The Tanzanian Chamber of Minerals and Energy says there are some small mines facing imminent closure, and this could have widespread financial and negative social consequences across the country.
Indeed. One last question for you, Dan. The fact of the matter is, even though the government repeatedly says it wants local refining, local value addition, these are operations that require a huge amount of power, and that's power that TANESCO so far has been completely unable to deliver. So how does the government square the circle, so to speak?
Yes, and that's the question. The consensus is that Tanzania simply couldn't build a copper smelter, for instance, because there isn't enough copper coming out of the country to fund it and make it worthwhile. On gold, however, that's a different question. There are some here who believe that local refinement of gold would be excellent, would add high value to the industry. But of course, Rama, those challenges you mentioned still exist, not the least to mention electricity. So building smelters, developing local refineries would be a very ambitious target indeed.
Indeed, we'll have to leave it there for the time being and see what happens. Thank you for the update. That's Dan Ashby, of course, live there in the commercial capital of Tanzania, Dar es Salaam.